Welcome back to the Minijet Shop. Today is episode 3 of our CUB build series, and the main goal for this episode is to knock out all of the primary hull welds in the boat and then come back from the outside, get them ground nice and clean so we get that perfect aesthetic that we're looking for. After that, we're going to be adding the windshield, the transom edges, and the pump guards to the back of the boat, as well as a few other things that we'll talk about when we get there. So to start, we're going to be finish welding the entire inside of the boat. So getting all those really critical welds done that we had just kind of tacked. That's this entire seam on the chine all the way running forward. Same thing on this side, getting the entire back welded out there as well. What are we looking to keep in mind here, Ben, when we get to this step?
Yeah, so you want weld a few feet on this side, weld a few feet on that side, and jump over and do it in sections. So you're kind of doing one section on each side and then the same section on the other side to balance your heat as much as you can, and check for any warping that's happening. Make sure it's sitting square on your cradle or on the floor, however you have it, shimmed up from the bottom. Cool. Just do some solid welds to keep it strong. These two seams get MIG welded and then ground clean, and then everything else is tape welded on the exterior.
Cool. And so I guess the one thing that you'll notice that we haven't put on besides the windscreen are these two kind of cap panels back here.
We'll go in and get these welds done first. That's the first kind of like finished exterior weld is going to be in here, and then the cap goes on afterwards, and it's a TIG weld on the outside on this boat. Okay, so I guess we'll just jump to Ben, finish welding this entire boat, burning through all that.
While we watch Ben knock out the main welds on this boat, you'll notice that he's doing the exterior welds on those front joints first, followed by the welds on the inside corners. This makes sure we have good penetration and minimal defects on the outside, which is especially important since when we come back and grind, we'll be exposing all of that. If you really wanted to, you could weld the inner seam first, but we recommend if you do that, before welding the outside of the joint, you should back cut the material that's bled through so you know you've got a good strong clean weld when you go over it from the outside. Now Ben's wrapped up the front end and has moved on to the bottom corner joints, working his way back a few feet on either side at a time to spread out the heat. After that, you'll see he's removed that brace bar and strap since he's happy that the twist in the hull has resolved itself from finish welding. And finally, you'll notice that Ben is going to double up the weld on the front exterior joints of the hull. This just ensures that he has enough material built up when he comes back later with the grinder.
Alright, so Ben just finished knocking out all the MIG welds on the inside of the hull, so you can see all these edges are now fully finished welded. Same thing on the outside, he did his nice double pass. So all the welds here at the front of the boat are going to be ground down.
Now, Ben's got the 7-inch grinder out with a 36 grit sanding disc on there. And the reason he's using that larger disc and grinder compared to the standard ones is to get a flatter grinding surface and less of a cupping effect when he goes over those joints. Obviously, the goal of grinding these welds down is to get that nice, smooth visual appearance that we're going for. And you'll notice that he touches on a few other spots around the hull that are slightly raised from heat distortion caused by welding on the backside of the panel. Grinding is one of those things that is a lot easier to take slow and do a good job on rather than rushing, taking too much material out and having to refill with weld. So just be patient when you're doing this, and it's normal for this to take more time than the actual welds itself. As you can see, there's a lot of dust building up on the floor, so make sure that you're in a well-ventilated spot like we are, and that you're wearing adequate respiratory protection for your space. Another thing worth mentioning is when we are doing a lot of grinding, we like to use a lubricating wax. In this case, we're using Walter Alumicut, and we find that works quite well to help prevent dust or chunks of material from sticking to all of our cutting tools. After the sanding disc, it's time to hit all of the grinds with the Scotch-Brite wheel to polish them up and remove those deeper cutting marks.
All right, Ben, so since we kind of last took a look at things, you made a pretty good amount of progress. What's going on?
Yeah, we did a bunch of grinding and polishing. So we've got the front combing welds all shined up and ready for wrap almost. Some finesse with the grinder. The grinding, or a nice grind is almost harder than a nice weld. So
now coming to the back, Ben knocked out all these transom welds back in here too. And so now it's time to put these caps on.
yeah. So same thing as the other pieces. If there's any bending markers, those need to be removed. And then these will fit up here. Occasionally there's a small trim to do, but nothing major, just a little grind even. We'll make that fit properly. And I'll get tacked on, and then we're gonna TIG weld the outside edge there. We left off, these were just tacked on, so now those are TIG welded, no grinding required.
These are some of the more visible welds on the boat, aside from what you'll see on the windscreen when we get up there.
Yeah.
But yeah, speaking of the windscreen.
Yeah, so that's going to be our next step. Very easy to install because the designers here have some nice little indentations here, or holes in the hood. So those correspond to, there's a center mark here and a center mark there, and then these ones mark the corners.
So it's just a matter of lining everything up.
Yeah, it falls into place. It's a two-man operation to get the curve that's needed to meet up with these holes. So you need a buddy, but we'll show the extrusion after in the next step.
Awesome. Cool. Let's jump to it.
Let's do it.
Now, tacking and welding the windshield in place is a fairly straightforward job, but being one of the most visible welds on the boat, it's important to take your time and prep it properly to make sure that your final weld looks nice. One trick that you can see Ben doing here is actually flattening down the tacks so they'll show through less when he passes over them with the MIG welder. And finally, you can see Ben is MIGging this joint here since it's an inside corner and it's fairly easy to make it look good, but this is definitely a spot you could TIG if you wanted to spend a bit more time and show off your nice welds.
So we got the windshield all finished welded in.
Yep.
Looking pretty good.
The bottom's welded onto the boat, so that'll hold it down nice and sturdy. In order to get the windshield down the right place, there's 3 markers on the front. So to find the rear point back here, we just measure the distance from the edge of the gunnel to the hole up here, transfer that to the back edge over here, and then draw a straight line between those two. The reason they don't put a rear mark is these sides can be used for either the high window or the low window, so we don't want a hole where it won't be covered up. And our next step is we're going to fit 1-inch tubing around the edges. So this front piece is curved. This is a 5-foot long piece. We really only need 4 feet, but to use our bender, it kind of leaves a straight on the ends. So we want, we're going to cut it shorter and cope the end, or miter the end. And then for the 2 side pieces, even easier, we're just going to cut this long shallow angle on the bandsaw here on this end to get that to sit flat on the gunnel. And then we'll miter this end to match the curved piece on the front here.
Nice. Okay, so I guess it's bending the curve first, and
yeah, do this piece first, and then make the side pieces fit in.
Now, adding the extruded tubes to the windshield is probably one of the trickier steps, especially if this is your first time building a kit. As you can see, Ben is going back and forth between the tube bender and the boat to test fit and adjust a few times, and to get that perfect fit with no gap. We found this is one of those things that just has to be done and tweaked for every boat individually, so that's why we don't include a pre-bent piece of tube in the kits. Now, this may mean that you have to make friends with someone in your area who has a tube bender, but if you've already got a welder, a tube bender is a pretty useful piece of equipment to add to your arsenal. Finally, with all of the tubes tacked in place, Ben is going to weld this joint, and again, as another super visible weld, it's important that it looks nice. And the reality of it being a tricky spot to use the MIG gun on means we'd either have to grind back the excess material after welding, which is pretty time consuming but makes for a nice looking joint, or we can use the TIG welder like you see Ben is doing here.
All right, so Ben's got the windscreen mostly welded together. So now we're gonna move on to the stringers. So this is, I guess, one of the last pieces of the boat that we weld in while it's right side up, is that
Correct.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we've got 4 box stringers to go in. In order to get perfect bends, we've included, there's a little slot here, so I like to weld those up on the bench, just easier than welding this delicate thin edge inside the boat with the MIG welder. So those will get pre-welded, and then they fit into the boat. So the inner stringers are super easy. There's a notch at the back here that grabs onto the transom cubby, and then our mini bulkhead, because it's located perfectly centered on those 2 marks that we showed in the beginning there. It also sets the width of this perfectly. It just bumps up against it there. Also, for convenience, we've marked notches here, and so what we'll do is stitch weld, so it'll be welded from one notch to the next, and then the one after that will be left blank, and then the one after that welded, so on and so forth, and then we'll oppose that pattern on the other side of the stringer to spread around the strength, and can flex between the stitches.
And I guess, yeah, that also helps minimize heat deformation of the bottom and
Yeah,
keeps the temper good.
exactly. And then the outer stringers will be placed just outside there, and then in your drawing package there'll be included the distance between the two. So we'll just cut a small piece of wood that can go there and space them equally off your perfectly centered inner stringers.
All right, so Ben's got all the stringers mock placed inside of the boat. So this is kind of what it's gonna look like, after he tacks and then finish welds them. This is general placement. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess you'll notice with our box section stringers, they have these rectangular cutouts in them.
Yeah, so when the UHMW is affixed to the boat, the bolts go right through the bottom and they poke up into the stringer in certain areas. So that gives you access to put your rubber back washer and nylock nut down in the hole without having to cut holes in the stringers arbitrarily. Cool. And then we also include these larger cutouts at the rear. That's for bilge pump brackets that fit down in there perfectly and then rivet on. So you can have 2 or just one bilge pump, depending how much water is going to end up in your boat.
So I guess it'll be tacking this, and then we're good to flip this whole guy over and start on the stuff on the bottom.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Now Ben is tacking the stringers in place to the bottom of the boat, and you'll notice that while he's doing that, he's using his weight to make sure that there's no distortion that'll shift the stringers around or allow them to start lifting away. Now that Ben is doing the stitch welds, it's important to note that he's wearing a respirator, and despite having good ventilation in the shop, being in this tub shape can always allow gases to accumulate, so it's important to keep breathing protection in mind while you're welding inside of the hull. Now that the stringers are welded to the inside of the boat, it's time to flip it all back over and install the last few things on the bottom. To start, we'll come in and open up these corners on the joint between the bottom and the side, because as we mentioned before, whenever we weld from the inside first, it's good to back cut on the outside before adding more material to ensure that we have a good spot to lay the weld in and make sure that we've got good penetration with no inclusions before grinding. Now that the welds are done on the bottom of the boat, Ben is going to come back with the grinder and flat all those out, either to the full aesthetically pleasing level on the front or just good enough for the UHMW and chine caps to go over nicely on the back. Again, there Ben is using some wax to lubricate the materials and prevent the disc from clogging up while grinding. Now, Ben is finishing up those front joints with the Scotch-Brite wheel to make sure everything is nice and smooth to the touch. All right, so Ben's got the boat upside down, and yeah, a lot of work's been done. What's happened?
Yeah, so to update, on the top side we finished stitch welding the stringers in and TIG welding the windshield on, so that the top side's all done. So now we've got the boat flipped over, and then the first thing we did was back cut these seams here. They're welded on the inside, so we back cut through the tacks and into the weld that was on the inside in order to ensure full penetration, and then that was welded solid completely, both sides and then the center also, and then ground off, to a final finish here in the front, where it's going to be exposed and not covered in these extrusions, and then just rough ground on the sides here in order for the extrusion to actually fit on there without touching the weld.
So your nice grind kind of goes, I guess, up until here, which looks like 18 inches, 2 feet back from the tip.
Yeah. So I measured off of the drawings that'll be included for the length of the chines. So that's what gave me that mark there for how far to clean. No point in grinding something really nice longer than you need when it's going to get covered up anyway. So
makes sense.
Yeah. Another step that's got to happen is, as we described before, these need to get TIG welded, finished TIG welded. And that's how they're left on this model. And then while we have the welder out, we're going to TIG weld on these pump protection bars. So these hang down from the boat, and rocks and logs will hit these first before it hits your jet pump to protect that. So pretty straightforward here. Ben is just TIG welding the pump guards onto the back of the boat. And as you can see, he's starting just by tacking them in place and getting them all square with the transom cubby before coming back and finish welding them all the way around. And while he's here, he's also just TIG welding those joints between the sides and the transom panels as well. You want to briefly touch on the point of having chines? Yeah.
Chine guards?
Yeah, so the point of the chine guards is to add extra protection to this weld seam, and then also to hydrodynamically adds lift to the boat. So the water is pushing on that little return, and adding lift to get the boat up out of the water.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so we've got the chine caps here, and we've also got these guys. So these are our strakes.
Yeah.
Now, what's going on with those?
So the strakes, there's going to be one either side, and they're kind of spaced equally from the chine to the center of the boat. And these have that same lifting effect. So again, the water will push and react against this and lift the boat when it's right side up as you're traveling at speed.
Okay, cool. So yeah, these are custom strake extrusions that we've designed and manufacture.
Yeah.
So obviously we like the way that they perform, and I think they're
Yeah.
pretty critical on every boat. Now to finish these guys, I guess we're gonna have to kind of follow the contour of the bottom of the boat there.
Correct, yes. So initially we're going to put a profile on the leading edges of all these pieces. And then they also get shortened to length. They're too long right now. And then, so we'll tack the majority of it on, and it's stitch welded the same as the stringers. And then the front edge will have to use force and heat in order to curve it to bring this piece right around to wrap around the boat.
Okay, makes sense.
Finally, Ben is going to tack down and then stitch weld the strakes and chine caps to the bottom of the boat. And like he mentioned with the stringers, the reason we do stitch welds is to maintain the strength while minimizing heat distortion and degradation, so we can keep the temper of the bottom and make sure it stays nice and tough. Now Ben is just applying some heat with the oxyacetylene torch to bend those parts around and follow the front curvature of the boat. When you're doing this, it's important to only put in as much heat as you need to keep the strength of the material high, and try to focus the heat around the site of your last weld as far back as possible, and that just makes sure that you get a nice fair curve as you bend those parts down.
All right, so this is where we're gonna wrap up for today. We made a pretty good amount of progress on the build, but there's still a few more things to weld on the bottom of the boat, so we'll pick them up in the next episode. Make sure that you guys are subscribed to the Minijet YouTube channel to see the next video in the series. Drop a like and leave us a comment. Let us know what your favorite part of the build was in this episode, and let us know what part you're looking forward to the most in the next ones in the future. So thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Later.